Okay, guys, I'm just gonna power on through. Some people said they can hear me, so hopefully that stays the same throughout. Um, I will try and fix my input volume for a few people who are asking about that, and we'll get going in a little second. Okay, so this, just to clarify for a few people as well, this is going to be for question 5 on tomorrow's paper, and it's the harmony question. So if you're planning on doing the melody question, this workshop won't be for you. And also if you're planning on doing the other harmony questions, then this won't be for you. So it's question 5 on tomorrow's paper, the second paper that you'll do. I also decided to do harmony as opposed to the listening, because really there was just I'm hoping to spend maybe an hour and a half here this evening, and there's too much to kind of cover if I went for everything. So I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of this evening, and hopefully you can see all of this. It might be glitchy, so apologies for that, but hopefully you can hear me still. Okay, so the rundown is going to be, I'm going to look at the 2021 harmony marking scheme because it's our most up-to-date notes from the examiners, and what I'll be detailing exactly what's said in that marking scheme, and then digging into a few examples from past papers. I'll cover a few of the do's and don'ts that they suggest are do's and don'ts, and ways to kind of how you might navigate those things yourselves. Then I have a little section that will just cover a few quick tips and hacks that you may not have thought of. You probably have thought of, and all of your teachers have probably thought of them too. So this might be old or information that I'm refreshing. So then the other thing I'll say is ask questions throughout, or leave comments and do chat to each other. I see people chatting away in the comments there, and actually I'm just looking here that people are saying that my volume is low, so let me just try and fix that quickly. This is the computer mic maxed out, so I hope it's coming through a bit louder now. I might just take that filter off. Okay, so maybe you can hear me a bit better now, hopefully. What about question 4, bro? I'm sorry, I'm not doing question 4 this evening. Question 5 I feel like is quite the common one. I'm talking to other colleagues of mine, and it's my own, selfishly, it's the one I'm doing with my own class. So there will be some things that cross over. It's harmony after all, so there will be some things that cross over, but it won't be specifically targeting question 4. Okay, so that's the rundown, and do keep the comments going. I think it's going to help each other if you're talking away to each other. I do have inappropriate comments flagged, so unfortunately if you have one of those, I'm afraid they won't come through. So let's keep it respectful. Okay, so I'm going to show you a few of the things that I have here. So I'll be using this scene here as a MuseScore examples, so I'll be switching over to MuseScore shortly and going through some examples. I have this is the marking scheme. Here's my tips and tricks for later on. I have a chord bank and a minor key just to show you some other things there. My harmony booklet is here, and I've seen in my emails already that loads of people are downloading that. That's in the description if you haven't seen that already. There's a link to download a harmony booklet with basically all of the rules of major key, and then I go on in that booklet later on to talk about all of the rules in the minor key. And quick thanks to anybody who has decided to pay for that. I did make it for free, but anybody who has thrown a bit of a few euro here and there, you're very kind, and thank you very much. It goes a long way. And then that'll be us. So I'm gonna try and set this as a max 8:30 kind of finish. You all need to go get your rest ahead of tomorrow, so I don't want to keep you too long. So if I go back to the rundown. So the first thing we're going to dive into here is the 2021 harmony marking scheme, and I'll just keep an eye on the chat. Great. Okay, if I just keep an eye on the chat and make sure I'm not missing anything there. Okay, so let me go into here, and if you bear with me a second, I just need to open that up on my own computer. So you should all see marking scheme 2021 at the top here. I just have a pages document open, and I'll make sure to go back over to OBS so that you can see that. Yeah, that's grand. Okay. So I've just copy and pasted all of the writing all of the text, I should say, that's in that marking scheme, and I'm just going to go through the 4 ways that the question 5 is going to be corrected. It's in 4 brackets. So you've got chords, chord quality, and then you've got sorry, here we are here. So you've got chords, and you get 20 marks for that, or sometimes that's different depending on how many boxes there are to fill. The quality, chord quality, is how the second way you're marked. Then you have the bass, and you have the bass the bass notes themselves, and then you've got the quality of the bass line. So I'm going to go through. I'm tackling like this evening is going to be structured by going through those 4 elements, and if we can kind of keep them fresh in our minds, I think that's your best chance at success tomorrow. It's just, have I done the chords? Have I done the chords quality? Have I done the bass notes? Have I done the bass note quality? And that's kind of how this evening is going to be structured. So if I come back up here and start with chords, excuse me. So I'm just going to read through a bit of this. This is like boring and a bit tedious, but I'm going to dive into MuseScore now and show you a few examples of how this works in practical. So marks are awarded in the first instance for correct and acceptable chords, and then we have this line here. This is in the context of the chord fitting the melody line at that point. So I'm just going to pause there for a second, because this is where people tend to stop. So we have marks are awarded if the chord fits the melody line at that point. So actually, you don't get a mark for just that first part of the equation. It has to be preceded by and followed by a chord that makes that follows the rules as such for harmony. And there are the harmony that we use on question 5 is loosely based off of functional harmony in classical music. So the rules are all detailed. Those rules, the classical harmony rules, are all detailed in my booklet if you want to go download it. And I'll go through a few of those this evening. So the line here that I want to highlight is here in bold. So marks for chords are not awarded in isolation. Chords must be part of a good progression. So in fact, you don't get a chord just if the chord fits the melody. You need to have the chord that comes before it and the chord that comes after it belonging to what is considered a good chord progression in the general scheme of things. And I'm going to go through a bit of what that means now in a moment. Other things that are on the agenda this evening are how that you use sevens, and I have both the minor and major things set up there. So what is accepted and what is not accepted as per the marking scheme. I'll do a little bit about this Cadential 6/4, but I don't want to freak anybody out who hasn't done it, or it hasn't been something that you focused a lot on in class. So I'm going to mention it and show you an example of where it's used. But if that is a bit too much for you, don't be worrying about it or panicking. You can completely get away with not using it if possible tomorrow. Okay, and I'll be going through minor and major examples throughout. Okay, I'm going to fly back over to OBS quickly to see if there's any questions coming through there. Perfect when you screen share, thank you, that's really helpful. This is my first time live streaming, by the way, so to say I'm nervous is an understatement. You only have to come back. Yay, camera 6. Okay, great. I think that was my Wi-Fi. Okay, so let's delve into MuseScore for a second, and I'll talk to this chords thing. So marks are awarded in the first instance for chord fitting the melody, and that the preceding chord is okay and that the following chord is okay. So I'm just gonna I'll be using mostly 2021 and 2019 or 2020 for this, because they're both major and minor respectively. So let me hop in here and hopefully this all works. Okay, so in the 2020 paper if I go down to the very end, just as a quick example of what this is all about. So the melody here at the last bar, and hopefully you can see that okay, I'll make sure that my hover box isn't in the way. So this last bar, we have E flat and E flat. We need the 2 boxes. The obvious choice here is 4-1, and I'll explain why in a second in case that's not obvious to you. But let's pretend for a second that I did this instead. At the end. So this melody note, E flat, is belonging to the chord that I've put up here, but you would not get the mark for it because the chord that follows this is not a good choice, particularly for the place that the chord is in. So we're at the last bar of the piece. What we're looking for is a cadence to finish out the piece, and in this case the only cadence that makes sense is 4-1. So what I do in the context of this key, which is E flat major, I go to chord 4 and then chord 4-1. Sounds like that. So that's a very obvious example. I just want to make sure that I have everybody on the same page before I go on to maybe more technical stuff. And then if I look at the broader chord progression on the last 2 bars, I've got 5-7 going to 6. So I've got 5-7, which wants to go to either 6 or 1 in a major context, and we go 6, and then we have 6 going to 4, which is falling a third, and we do like that as per the rules of classical harmony. And then we have 4 going to 1, forming our plagal cadence, 4-1. And it's at this point I think I should talk just very briefly about cadence. So there's one of the areas that I think students of mine have found difficult is how many phrases or where are the cadences throughout the piece of music. And what I tend to do is get mine to start at the end. And again, if this is contrary to what your teacher said, trust your teacher, not me. I'm just some guy on YouTube. So if we have, if we're going from the end, generally speaking, phrases are going to happen in groups of 4 bars. And I think that's particularly important in the context of this year, where the phrase lengths might look a bit strange. So you might have some lines that have 2 bars, some lines that have 3. Do I have any that I can show you here? No, I don't. I'm sorry. So phrases that might have 3 bars in a line, and they might look a bit strange. So if you can count to 4, you should be able to kind of navigate your way safely. So we have 1. So if I select this bar, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. And then what we can see here is this is kind of like the cadence bar here. So every 4 bars we're going to have a cadence. So I'm counting from here: 1, 2, 3, cadence. And then if I go backwards through the whole piece, the cadence I happen to have here is an interrupted cadence. Again, I could have had, given the melody here, I could have had 5-1 here because that fits the melody as well. But just I decided in this one I was going to use an interrupted cadence. It is worthwhile saying that different solutions are going to happen in question 5. So if you could that is to say you could have a few solutions that are correct and fully correct, even if they're slightly different and there's variations, as long as you adhere to, is that a cadence point, is the chord preceding it acceptable in the rules, is the chord following it acceptable within the rules. So that's kind of the first chord thing. I'm going to hop back over to make sure that the live stream is still going in case it has died on me again. Okay, we're still live anyway, even if the video isn't. Okay, and I'm going to keep an eye on the chat too. Okay, so just a question that I see here. Let me just scroll up a bit, make sure I haven't missed anything. Yes, I'll be running through how to identify minor harmony in my tips and tricks thing later on. Do we use the chords in pen? that's actually something that's come up in recently in a chat that I had with colleagues. So use pencil if possible, and that's what I'm saying to mine, for the value, or for the reason that if you make a mistake, you can obviously rub it out. So that's one reason not to use pen. And then the second reason not to use, and then when you are using a pencil, I should say, you just need to have a pencil that's going to be dark enough for the machine correctors to pick up, is what I believe is the thing. I don't know if there's a specific pencil type. That's not my area of expertise, but if there's a specific pencil type that your teacher suggested, you might pop that into the comments. Just that it can be read by the scanner, or that the scanner will pick up that mark. So if you have a really light pencil, when it's scanned into the scanner, it may not come out as clear. So pen would come out, but obviously you want to be able to rub out things and change your idea, because really your first draft of the harmony is unlikely to be your last draft and the final draft. Okay, just go back to more questions. Another one about pen. No, pencil if possible, I think. Wait, WTF is the listening elective. I've lost that one. Okay, this is actually a really good question. So, Molly Terrence, I hope I'm pronouncing that okay. Is it essential to put in cadences if you're not 100% sure of where they are? Or should you just assume they're every 4 bars and stick to that? So, in past papers there have been examples of question 5s that don't have a perfect 4-bar structure each time. For the large majority of the whole question 5, there will be 4-bar phrases, and there might be just a random 2-bar one thrown in at either the start or possibly at the end, or a 6-bar thing at the end. The cadences, if you're following the rules of, the chord rules that your teachers would have gone through the entire 2 years with you, if you're following those rules, you'll likely stumble upon the cadences even if you're not entirely sure where the cadences are. So if it's an area of weakness for you to spot cadences, I wouldn't worry overly about it. Get your first draft down of what you think the chord should be, and then when you revisit it, try and count back the bars, and if it's making sense that okay, there's every 4 bars there is a type of cadence, then you're likely, it's just by law of coincidences, you're likely in the right ballpark there. And the other thing I would say about cadences is when you're looking at whether it's sorry, I just lost my train there. So yeah, when you're looking for cadences, the other way to look for them is if you look at the melody, sometimes the clue is in longer duration notes. So at the end of 4-bar phrases, if you can kind of tap out the rhythm, at least, even if you're not able to fully hear a melody in your head, tapping out the rhythm can give you a kind of indication as to where the stresses or the kind of pauses and the breaks in the music are happening between phrases. And ultimately that's what a cadence is. It's kind of highlighting, it's the punctuation of music. It's telling you where the comma is, there's a little lull in the music and it's going to go on, or whether it's the full stop moment, as it were, at the end, if it's a perfect cadence or a plagal cadence. Okay. Oh yeah, there's things about confusion about the electives coming up. So if you've done a performance exam, as in like a practical exam, back in whenever they were the Easter holidays, then the listening elective is not you. You're doing the composing core and listening core, I think it's called. So just to clear that up, you're not. There's another one that's scheduled tomorrow, and that's for people who've chosen to do listening as their 50% option, and not the performance exam. Okay, if there's an upbeat at the start of the piece, and I'll get back on track of what I plan to talk about. If there's an upbeat in question 5, the only part that really affects is the bass line. So let me think, is there one back here? Let me go to MuseScore for a second. No. Okay, the last 2 years there wasn't one. This is, by the way, a full document I have of all of the solutions for everyone done from the first time the Leaving Cert as we know it now happened, all the way up into 2021. So it's a MuseScore document that has all the solutions there. No anacrusis. Okay, there hasn't been an anacrusis for a while. I'm not sure whether... Oh, there we go. There's one. So 2016 there was an anacrusis. So where you have to be conscious of... So this is in 6/8. The starting bar is a quaver. So the melody starts with a quaver. We have a rest here in the bass. But if you come down to my last bar, you'll see here that this is a dotted crotchet, which is amounting to 3 quavers, and there's a crotchet amounting to 2. So 3 plus 2 is 5. So I've intentionally omitted the last, and actually there's a mistake there. Sorry. And then we need a rest. So that should have in the bass as well. So it only really affects the bass. So what we have is 1, 2, 3 as in dotted crotchet, and then just 1, 2 as a rest, because that needs, this last bar needs to add up to 5, because 5 plus our very first anacrusis 1, so 5 quavers plus 1 quaver equals 6 quavers. So the anacrusis bar, which is not bar 1 by the way, this is where we count bar 1 from, that anacrusis bar, which is 1 quaver, needs to add up with the last bar to give you a full bar of 6/8. I hope I've described that clearly. So I'll be doing the bass line later. I won't name names, but I've seen one of my own students in the comments. So just shout out to anybody from my own class. If you're there, you're very welcome. I did envisage at one point this was just going to be me and my class as like a public lesson. I'm terrified to even look at how many people are on now, to be honest. Okay, so let's go back to my rundown quickly to keep me on track. So that was the chords part, sorry I should say. So let's go back in here. So that was chords. Sorry, here, chord quality. Okay, so under the chord quality title, this is the marking scheme again, just to make sure these are not my words, these are the marking scheme's words directly quoted. Marks are rewarded here for the musical quality of the overall progressions chosen. While the candidate may have chosen chords that worked at any point, there may have been better choices. If that is the case, this will be reflected in the chord quality mark. So essentially what they're saying here is, you could have picked chords that both fit the melody, and the chord that came before it and the chord that came after it happened to not break any rules. But the distinction between somebody maybe getting the higher marks on this question and somebody getting just the lower tier or just below that, that distinction is made in this chord quality mark. So there may, if all of the options are exhausted and it actually turns out that there was one option that was kind of the best and the kind of most obvious to go for, then that's where you might lose a quality mark. Oftentimes though, if you follow the rules of the chords that I was talking about there, where the one preceding it and the one following it follow the rules, you'll likely get the chord quality mark for each instance of your chord progression. So it's really about nailing this chords part down first, and then you might, in your revisions, like after your draft 2, draft 3, draft 4 if needs be, or at least your proofreading of 1, 2, 3 and 4, that you might revise 1 or 2 chords that actually the better choice for maybe the bass running more smoothly, or there could be anything really, any number of things that I'll hopefully get to as well, that make one chord progression work better than another. And that's really like we were talking about the quality points of this, and same for the bass, we're really going back and proofreading and saying, is that the absolute best way I can do that? Whereas these are the more technically black and white, is that right? Is that the right chord? Is that the right chord to precede it? Is that the right chord after it? Okay, so quality might be more nuanced, and actually if I scroll all the way down here, the types of things they say about chord quality: excellent chord progressions, you get 9 to 10 marks out of 10 in this year. So this is 2021. You know, there's a broad stroke of a broad range of interpretations there, like what is an excellent versus a very good versus a good. So it's not for me to say that, by the way. I just know that the quality is where you'll definitely you can differentiate between what's a really really well answered question and maybe one that just in one or two moments lacked the right chord progression. Hope that makes sense. Again, that one is likely maybe going to this recording be going up. Yeah, this recording will be available on YouTube directly after when the stream ends. I think it makes a video straight onto my YouTube channel. So question 5 is worth 25% of your overall mark. So your practical or your elective. So whether you're doing the listening elective, composing elective, or performance elective. Again, a large majority of people do the performance elective. So your practical and Easter, that's worth 50%, and then the listening is worth another 25%. So listening 25%, the composing 25%, and the performance, or the elective I should say, is 50%. So that's how it works out. And usually it's 60 and 40 marks given on the composing paper, but you only have to do one question this year, so they're going to adjust the marks that the weighting of 25% still stays the same. How many marks is the whole? Yeah, I kind of covered that just now. So I have the sample answers are actually on my Patreon page for anybody who wants to check that out, but that's a cheeky plug, I'm sorry. Has there ever been two minors? Has there ever been two minors 2 years in a row? These kind of predictions are in some ways pointless because there's literally no way of knowing. Okay, so let me go back here for a second into where do I want to go. So I'm going to go on to this is what I'll go on to next. I think the do's and don'ts of the chord progressions is an interesting one to tackle because it kind of it opens up a few other things that might come along. So these are direct quotes. I just made them a little bit more colourful for some reason, but these are the things that are directly quoted in the marking scheme. So we have 5/7 cannot go to 5. That's not accepted. And what I've done on the left side is done all the minor versions of these chords, and then I've done all the major versions of these chords as they would exist in a major marking scheme. So 5/7 to 5 is not accepted, and the chord of 5, as you may know, as you hopefully know, is major in both the major and minor key. I'll go through a chord bank just at the end as well, just to really cover all bases here. So just that is coming down the line, and also in case you're wondering, the bass whole area is being covered as well. Okay, so 5B or 5/7B should generally be followed by 1, and this again just is in a minor key. So just what I would highlight now is just take note of when the chord is lowercase, I'm referring to a minor chord, and if you're somebody or if you're a student that is using Roman numerals, you should really be very careful about how you do them. Like, I would be ultra pedantic, and my own students know this, but if nearly to the point of annoyance, I would be coming around and making sure that this I even looked smaller in your font. So even if you have the dot, I wouldn't really be happy unless you had the small I, just so nobody can make any wrong presumptions that you don't know your stuff. So I'd just be really pedantic about how you go about making sure that the if it's a major chord, that it's very obviously capitalized, and if it's a minor chord, very obviously lowercase. Okay, so this is 5B or 5/7B should generally be followed by 1 in a minor key. 5B or 5/7B should be followed by 1 or 6 in a major key. And possibly if you did an odds thing, it should possibly go to 1 more times than it goes to 6. If you examined every piece of music ever written in the classical over and then did a sampling of that, you'd probably likely find this chord going to chord 1 a lot of the time, but it can go to chord 6 in some instances. that can also be at a cadence point of an interrupted cadence. The reason why this works actually at a cadence point particularly well is because your ear is possibly most predicting that chord 1 is following it, and you might know that the interrupted cadence is called a deceptive cadence. So you're actually ramping up the amount of the seat happening. If you use 5/7-B, your ear really wants or really thinks it's going to hear 1, and then it gets the surprise of 6. So that can work actually quite well sometimes. And while I'm on it, there is no reason you should use inversions. So these 5B and 5/7-B are examples of inversion, which I'll go through a little bit as well. But there's no reason why you should use inversions unless you really have a strong reason for using it, and that you could nearly argue a conviction as to why you use it. And one of my tips later on that I'm going to come back to and revisit at the end of this is, if this most simplest harmony works, go with that. And if you proofread it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times and it's still the simplest one is the one that works most solidly, then that's the one you should go with. You're not impressing anybody by having a million inversions in. You're not impressing anybody by having lots of 7s in or anything like that. So there's no brownie marks, and this comes up all the time, but there's no brownie marks for using 7s or using inversions. You should do your best. You should do yourself the best service by just sticking to the real fundamentals of what you know works. Okay, moving on to the next one. So again, 2 in the context of a minor key, something you may or may not know. If you're using chord 2, you always have to use it in first inversion. So if you want to use chord 2, you have to use 2 diminished B. And I'm going to just highlight that a moment, because this is something that people do all the time, is they forget the little diminished sign. So this is a 2 lowercase superscript. It's a fancy term for putting the text a little bit higher with the circle, like a degree sign, if you know what that is. And then B is the inversion part, and you need to always use 2 as an inversion, so 2B in a minor key. So 2 diminished B. And it needs to have all of that in the box if you want to get the full marks. If you say 2B and you have it as lowercase but you don't have the degree sign, you don't get the mark. So that's just something to be really, really conscious of. Okay, and so 2 to 1, the point here on this sentence is 2 to 1 is generally not accepted, except as an approach to 1C in the Cadential 6/4. I will revisit the Cadential 6/4 at the end. It can be a bit of a head wreck for people, so I don't want to lose anybody right now by delving into a big technical description of what 6/4 is, or the Cadential 6/4 is. But I will show you an example of where I've used it in one of the solutions. So for anybody, maybe I'll do that towards maybe the end when I get the kind of what I feel are the fundamentals out of the way. So the major version of that is 2 to 1. So we know 2 just exists as 2. Now this could be 2B as well. You're allowed to use 2B to 1, but it's generally not accepted, except as approach to 1C in Cadential 6/4. So that's the same thing again. So basically, don't use 2 to 1 unless you've spotted that the Cadential 6/4 is a possibility. Here's another one about Cadential 6/4. If you don't know what that is, I really don't want people going, oh god, I don't know what that is, I must have missed something in class. Sometimes, depending on how far a teacher can get through a course, I've done it before myself, but the Cadential 6/4 just hasn't been possible for me to really delve into it much, so I thought the safer option was to leave it out. So if you're seeing these words here and not knowing what they are, I just really don't want you to be panicking about that. You may simply just not have done it yet, and you can get away with an entire harmony without doing it, so don't be worrying. Cadential 6/4 must be on the stronger of the 2 beats at a cadence point. If you do know what the Cadential 6/4 is, this is something that I would be strongly highlighting to you. It needs to be on the stronger of the 2 beats at a cadence point. So let's have the situation. Actually, do you know what? I won't delve into an example just yet. I'll come back to that at the end. And then it's the exact same thing for the major key. Secondary 7s, if used, and that was me making that in bold, so I directly quoted, but they didn't put if used in bold. I'm putting it in bold. Must be used correctly. They must be followed by a chord whose root is a 4th higher. I'll come back. I am kind of I don't really want to delve into again the technical aspects of what this is. If you've happened to do secondary 7s, power on you and use them if you see them. But if you're somebody who just is only starting with secondary 7s, and you kind of understand them and you know what they are, I would even in that context be a bit wary of using them, because they're not necessarily on the course to teach. They're not on the curriculum of the Leaving Cert Music course. So really there won't be an absolute requirement or need for them in order for you to answer 100% correct or accurate the harmony tomorrow. So that's why I have if used in bold. I think it I'm not saying anything too out of place to say that you can completely get away with a harmony without these. Okay, no doubling of a major third under chord symbol. Again, this is something that I actually think is worthwhile stressing. So I'll come to an example of that now in a moment. So we have, if you have a major chord, and I'll jump back into music score now to show you an example, but if you have a major chord, and under the box, actually, do you know what, I will jump back into music score here, so, and find where I've used. Okay, so let's, this is 2017, the first 2 bars, this is what was given to us. So I'm just going to explain this by what's come here. So we have, this is a first inversion chord of A flat. So we're in the key of A flat here, 4 flats on our left. Quick way of finding out that, if you don't know how to do it, if you go to your second last flat there, it's on the A flat space, that's the key you're in. So in all flat side keys you can actually do that. So if you go to your second last flat, and I'm saying second last reading left to right, so second last flat is A flat, that's the key we're in. The other real big giveaway of what key you're in is the chord bank on the preceding page in your exam will have a big A flat at the beginning, and then you'll notice that your chord 3 and chord 7 are grayed out because you're not allowed to use them. But actually, if you look at the notes of chord 3 and chord 7 in a major key, that gives you all of the notes that you'll possibly need in that key. So it gives you what's flat, it gives you what's it gives you what's flat, it gives you the signature notes of that key. So the chord bank that you're provided with in the exam is actually a big hint as to what notes you're to use. So even if you're somebody who struggles with key signature, the chord bank can kind of be the clue there. Okay, sorry, so let me get back to the point here. So here we have what is called a first inversion chord. If we're in Roman numeral land, what we say is 1B, and if we're in chord symbol land, we say A flat over C. For people intending on using chord symbol, I just want to stress that you need to have A with the flat symbol, and then you need to have the stroke, and you need to have C, and all of these components need to be correct as in keeping with the key that you're in. So if you forget the flat, or if you forget forget to say the note C, or you forget the stroke, any component there that's missing will be will make sure that will mean that you don't get that mark for that box. So I find my own class are using Roman numerals because there's only one thing to get right here, that you have a capitalized 1 chord and B, and it doesn't matter whether I'm C major, D major, G major, E flat major, that's going to be 1B all day long. Okay, so if I quickly come back to, oh sorry guys, I'm in the wrong thing here, my bad, sorry, let me start that again, apologies. Oh yeah, I'm just seeing in the comments here, sorry, somebody said secondary 7th is 2-7 chord and must only be followed by a chord 5. That's correct, absolutely. So just some random loser is the tag. My god. Okay, it's just so yeah, that's absolutely correct. So one example of a secondary 7th is the 2-7 chord. So if you know how to use that, use it, but please really know how to use it before committing to it. It won't be required tomorrow. Okay, sorry, I had the wrong screen up, guys, there, so apologies. So I'm back in music score now. I switched over to music score on my desktop, but I hadn't done it for you guys, so you were looking at text there, my bad. So this is the example I'm in here. I'll go through that key signatures thing once more. If this is the key signature presented with and you don't know what it is, go into the second last flat here, and that's the key you're in. So I have 4 flats here reading from left to right: B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat. The second last flat, that's the key I'm in, A flat, and it's on the A flat space there. So that's the clue. Okay, so here's the first inversion chord. Okay, and what the marking scheme had said was sorry, the marking scheme had said that the major third of this chord can't be doubled at this point of the melody. And when I say this point, I mean the point at which the box occurs. So let's pretend for a second that the exam was wrong and that they had a C happening here in the melody part, and that they also had a C happening here in the bass part. This would be the C, which is the major third of this A flat chord, A flat, C, and E flat. The C would be doubled here, as in it's happening in both the right hand and the left hand, the treble clef and the bass clef. This would be considered doubling the third, and it would be considered doubling the third of a major chord, because A flat, our chord 1 here is major, and it would be considered doubling the third underneath the box as it occurs, because it's happening here. Interestingly, because they've specified underneath the chord, technically within the confines of the leaving cert, you can do this. You can say the first inversion chord even if that C note, the third, happens later in the bar, and that's strictly to do with how they've worded what they've worded. And I'll go back to that now quickly, make sure I'm doing this right, and apologies for that mistake there a second ago. So it says here, no doubling of a major third under chord symbol, and it's major chord only, because minor chords can have their third doubled. And again, this is the exact same rule for the major and minor keys. Sorry, yeah, that not seeing music score. Apologies, that was such an oversight. Yeah, sorry guys. Okay, so let's go back to where we go now. Okay, so that's kind of the do's and don'ts done. Let me, if I make sure that I'm doing all these. So that was the do's and don'ts there that we've just done. Before going on to quick tips and hacks, I might just spend a moment talking about the bass. So if I come back over to pages here, and I'll scroll back up. No, down. My bad. So in the bass here, you get half a mark per correct bass note under each correct chord symbol. So this is the technical black and white of you get the mark or you don't get the mark, or in this case you get the half mark or you don't get the half mark. So this kind of really corresponds to our chords versus chords quality. So in order to get this half a mark, and it will amount to whatever amount of boxes there are to be filled, but in order to get this 0.5 mark, you need to first of all agree with what you set up above. So if you say, and again I'm going to come back to MuseScore for this. So let's look at the second bar there. It's B flat minor. So I'm saying that this is chord 2 in root position, and or in fact this is what was given to us, but let's just pretend it was me for a second. So chord 2 in root position in the context of A flat major is B flat minor. And again, if you're using chord symbols, you need to make sure you have the B, the flat, and the minor. This B needs to be capitalized as well. Just all of those components need to be really on point. And then in our bass clef, we need to have a B flat note. So the bass note needs to agree with what we set up above in the chord box. And then this is the same for, let's go for this one. So we have 5B. So if I say 5B, which means E flat over G, or in the G in the bass, it means that I have to say that this note here underneath the chord, as it happens, has to be G. There's a really important thing to say here about alignment and how you write your music. So in MuseScore, it's very easy. It's done for you. You don't have to, like, I have atrocious handwriting, as anybody will attest to. But in MuseScore I get away with that because it does the spacing for me perfectly. So I don't need to worry about where my notes, or whether they're lined up. Now, I wouldn't suggest that you get a ruler out and you do it that way, but you really need to be conscious of where does beat 1 happen, and where is this happening, where is this box occurring in beats in the bar. Like this is on beat 3 here, for instance, in our 4/4 time signature. Is my bass corresponding to this? Because oftentimes what happens in when I'm correcting is I see that people have visually written the note underneath where it's happening, but it actually rhythmically amounts to being in the wrong position. So when you actually do out the rhythm of where this occurs, there'll be a misalignment between, say, beat 3 and where the bass is happening. So you just have to be really, really careful about, do I know what beat of the bar that this box is occurring on? So that's like, I think they're the fundamentals of getting that 0.5 note right. At the point that the box occurs, have I aligned that it's in the same beat? At the point that the box occurs, have I aligned that? And does it agree with the chord that hopefully at that point you've mastered, and you've picked the exact right chord for that progression at that moment in time? And does that agree with the chord above? So I'm going to pause there, let that sink in for a second, and I'll go back to the chat here for a minute. I'll go actually over to YouTube. No phrase marks in question 5. That's not required. That's only for the melody question in question 1, and maybe the melody questions in the other ones as well. But no phrase marks required for question 5. Does it not tell you what key you're in? Yeah, that is a good point. It does tell you what key. So I just know that some people sometimes panic about that, and they say to themselves, "Oh, I'm not somebody who's good at key signatures." But just sometimes in an exam situation where we're feeling a bit pressurized, it's sometimes worthwhile just taking a deep breath and saying to ourselves, "Okay, I've completely drawn a blank here on what that key signature means. What are the other clues on the page that are going to help me out?" Well, you've got a melody and you've got the first 4 bars of a bass written, so there might be clues there. What note does it end on, the melody, for instance? If you can't remember from the key signature itself, go to your chord bank. There'll be a lot of clues there. So you can do 1 to 2. Yeah, you can do. Somebody's asked, can you do chord? I'm assuming it means chord 1 to 2. Yes, you can do chord 1 to 2, and in my booklet that you can download here from the description, I've shown you exactly what you do then after that. So if you do go chord 1 to 2, you'll want to leap away after. So chord 1 to 2 to 5, maybe back to 1. That'd be a very strong and common chord progression. Thanks, Fionn. Word of encouragement there. Don't apologise, David, you're nailing it. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Is there any way to practice these harmony questions and correct it? Is putting it into MuseScore and listening to this? I think hearing what you're writing is really an important thing. It's not always in reality what we can expect people to be able to do in, like I said, the pressurized situation where you're kind of chained to a desk really for an hour and a half, and you're hoping to kind of come up with music in that kind of pressurized environment without a piano beside you, without a guitar. Like, I compose myself, and I find if I would never do it in a vacuum as such. I would never do it just sitting down at a desk without my guitar in my hand or my software or whatever I was doing. I would always generally be getting aural feedback of what I was composing. So there's not much I can do there and fix that for tomorrow. But yeah, it's not. There are ways of getting good and training your ear. That's why your teachers may have done a lot of solfa or trying to get you to sing the melodies and try to get you to feel the melodies. You can definitely tap along, the rhythm quietly, obviously in the exam, but get a sense of the flow of the melody's rhythm in the exam. If you not, and some people can do this. So I know, but I know it's a challenge for others to hear the melody specifically. So do what you can on that one. Could you go over parallel octaves? Okay, well, this might be actually good news for people. The parallel octaves and fifths thing is, and I have this on good authority actually, is no longer something that is held against anybody. So if you happen to have parallel fifths or parallel octaves, it actually doesn't make you lose any marks. So that might be surprising to hear for some people, but you don't need to worry about the parallel fifths and octaves, and I can say that with a lot of certainty. That's come up a good bit in any chats I've had with colleagues, and it's been something that comes up quite a bit. Would you recommend going over what you've written in pen to ensure that the examiner will see it? It's actually not so much the examiner, but actually the scanner. So that just to read that question again, would you recommend going over what you've written in pen to ensure that the examiner will see it? So that's quite logical, but I actually think if you just make sure you have a pencil that isn't too light. So I know there's like 2B or there's darker distinctions. They've gone out of my mind right now in a live stream, but you might just Google what's like a kind of dark enough pencil that will be picked up by a scanner. sure that Google will return the answer. When do you know to make a note in the bass a natural? Can you double the seventh? Okay, so there's a few here that are quite technical. I'm going to quickly go back over to bass quality now, and then I'll talk a little bit about minor chord progressions, and I'll probably just leave this then. If there's a rising scale or something similar across 2 bars, and passing note is on the first beat of the second bar. Okay, because so some technical questions coming in there, guys, and they're all really good. So let's go for the bass quality, and I'll talk for the bass quality. I'm going to talk about minor a little bit, and also about where you're getting your marks for quality there. So let me go over to OBS. So I have MuseScore open there, and I just want to come down to this again. So now you should see the bass. So we have excellent bass line, excellent awareness of style, very good bass line, very good awareness of style. You get the gist. So this is where you're getting your bass quality from. If I go back over to my MuseScore, again, MuseScore is a really easy way of doing these solutions. So I actually, just this year, I banged out like 20 of them in a row over the course of a week or so. But what made life easy was whatever pattern you were given in the first 4 bars, say. So let's go over to, if I can remember what the pattern was initially. And you know what, I'll focus in on 2021, because this has the minor key. So this is kind of going to be bass quality plus minor chords. Okay, so the pattern I think was fairly straightforward for this one. It was just, I'll zoom in here. So chord 1 here in D minor. Again, our key signature here is F major, but chord 1. So we just quickly how you go to your relative minor. It'll be in the chord bank for you though as well, just so you know. So you don't need to really know this. But if you're looking at the key signature here and it says F major, or what you've learned is F major, if you go to the La or the 6th degree of F major, we go F, G, A, B flat, C, and D. Then that 6th degree of the note is actually our starting point, or our home tonic minor key. So here we have D minor as being chord 1. Again, notice it's lowercase in my Roman numerals, and it looks lowercase, so that's really, really important. And the bass was just this very simple pattern: root, root, third, root. And I'm saying root of a D minor chord is D, third of a D minor chord is F, and the 5th would be A, but actually the pattern here was fairly straightforward. So we've got D, D, F, D. That went on to G, G, B flat, G. Where are these coming from? Well, this is chord 4. So what we're given here is root, root, third, root. Where have we seen that pattern before? Oh yeah, it's the first bar. And you'll see that pattern just goes on the entire way throughout it until bar 4. And then you were given the first 4 bars, if I remember correctly, on the 2021 paper. So what we were given was this 4-bar pattern. Somebody had a comment there asking, when do you know to naturalize a bass note? So this is to do with, if we are on the harmony question 5, the type of minor scale that we're going to use is the harmonic minor scale. And it's maybe at this point it'll be worthwhile taking a look at the chord bank for that year. Yeah, there we go. So this is the chord bank you were given that year. Give me 2 seconds there. Okay, the screen is going to go small for a second here, but then I'll get it back. Nothing bad has happened, I promise. Now, is that working? Yeah. Okay, so this is the chord bank you were given, and if you look here at the chord bank you were given, the amount of information packed in here is actually everything you would possibly need for the notes. So if I go through what the notes of a D minor harmonic minor scale are, they are D, E, F, G, A, B flat, C sharp, and D. So all of the information I could possibly need to get me through this was actually housed within that chord bank for that year. And you know, even if you were only given the chord 3 which is augmented, as you may know, in the minor key. Even if you're only given out these grade notes, which you always are, and you weren't given the first two, you could still glean a lot of information. So if we're in D minor, we know that the first note is going to be D, and then we know that the second note hopefully is going to be E, and then you were given F, G. Oh, you were actually given E. Sorry, E, F, G, A. The only one missing out of, if we combine chord 3 and chord 7, the only note missing really is B flat, and our tonic key. So you're given a lot of information in this chord bank, just to notice. You don't use chord 3 and we don't use chord 7. Maybe an obvious point, but that's the reason they're grayed out. I think it's worthwhile me saying things that are really obvious anyway. And then if we use chord 2, it has to be with the degree sign, that little superscript circle. And also, if we do want to use this chord, you have to use it in first inversion. So what I get my students to do a lot of the time is kind of rewrite this this part of the chord bank in brackets, maybe underneath or on your rough work page, to include chord 2B. And the other thing I would get you to do maybe as a rough work is just write out what chord 5-7 looks like in that context. So you might do out a separate chord bank on the rough work pages that are provided in the exam paper, and you'll write out 5-7 and maybe in a minor key write out 2B. Okay, so that's the harmonic minor scale. So in a harmonic minor scale, what we have is a raised seventh. So if I'm in the key signature, which is in this case is 1 flat, is 1 flat here, then what I'm expecting to have in my notes are D, E, F, G, A, B flat, C, and D. But in a harmonic minor scale, we have to provide an accidental every time we want to use that 7 degree C. So we tend to not use C natural if we're in a minor key like D minor. We'll raise that 7 degree up a semitone, and that will make C sharp. If we're in a key that happens to have a flat 7th degree, what we would need to do in that case is raise it by naturalizing it. So let's pretend for a second that this note was going to be C flat in our key, even though it's not, but let's just pretend for a second. Then in order to raise that a semitone, we would need to make it C natural. So that answers one of the questions that was in the chat, and I hope that's a little bit clearer for that person. And then when we go to apply it in our bass part, so if I go back to my solution that I did, which is in MuseScore, so what do I need to do here? OBS, sorry, MuseScore. Talking to myself really helps me stay on where I'm supposed to be. Okay, so now you should see MuseScore, hopefully. Now, okay, so I'm in MuseScore again, and if you look at the bar 4 here, this is where we were given an instance of the use of this raised 7th. So if you want to use the note C, sorry, I'll move this over in case my hover is in the way, sorry. If we want to use this note C in our D minor context, we need to make it raised. Unless you're using the melodic minor scale, if you know how to do that, go for it. I think there is no reason necessarily why you should have to use the melodic minor scale in the bass part, unless it was given to you in the bass part, the first 4-bar phrase. So I believe it's possible tomorrow to get away, if it isn't a minor key tomorrow, you could get away with using just the harmonic minor scale the whole way along in the bass part. So what we had here was on chord 5, and it's chord 5 that's going to, chord 5 is the one that's going to have the raised 7th within it, because the root 3rd and 5th are A, C sharp, and E respectively for chord 5 in D minor. So chord 5 is A major and D minor. So what we had here was root, major 3rd, and then we had this descending arpeggio. Okay, and again, just to give a bit of context. So that's what it sounds like. And then here's the copy paste thing that I did. So after coming to what I was happy with as a chord progression the whole way through, you'll see every time I used chord 2 there, I had 2, the little degree sign, and B. So I made sure all of that was intact, and I used all the chords that I thought were good and were part of a good chord progression. So I did all my chords first, tried to be as close to the quality as I could be. Again, I can't guarantee that I'm going to get full marks here on this one either, but I'm trying to follow as many of the rules as I possibly can. I think I have my cadences down, all that kind of good stuff. And then what I do is, with the bass part, I simply when I was doing these at trying to do 20 in a row, I would have copied the first 4 bars and then simply pasted every 4 bars, and then it's about adjusting things. So for instance, bar 2 here was just one chord the whole way, so it was just G, G, B flat G, root, root third, root. And what I ended up having to do on this, what was the equivalent bar 2 of the phrase, so you remember that I've copy and pasted here 1, 2, and then over the bass 3, 4. So what I did was G, G, because this is E diminished over G, or 2 diminished B, first inversion of the 2 chord in a minor key. And then I had to adjust what happened on this latter half of the bar to the new chord that I had. And here I actually avoided the use of the Re 7th by just doing the root and the 5th of that chord. I actually, when I was doing the solution, I was making the example and point to my own class that you don't necessarily need the Re 7th every time you have the chord of 5 in a minor key. So, there's ways to get away from it. Then going on just quickly, I had to again just adjust. So this is bar 3 of my phrase now. If I'm upside, yeah. So this here is bar 3 of my phrase. And in bar 3 of the phrase, all we had was D, D, F, D, and I just go. So just again a slight variation, but is it in keeping with the style? Yes. Is it an excellent awareness of style? Well, that's where interpretation comes into it. So if I went to the strict excellent bass line, excellent awareness of style, does mine adhere to that? Maybe not excellent. Again, this is interpretation, so this is where I'm saying I may not get full marks, but this is my interpretation of what I am aware of the style that was given to me, and the awareness of style thing is about whether you've kept in what the bass was. So I've used again the same rhythm the whole time. This is again from my own experience, but from talking to people who have examined, there's no requirement to start putting in triplets or semiquavers or any kind of fancy rhythmic stuff. And actually early on when I was teaching this, I believe I taught the wrong thing, and I had people trying to be more creative and florid in how they did their bass lines, but actually you're trying to stick actually with the style that was given. So it's just really is a copy and paste job, but altering where it needs be. And then when it comes to bass quality, you're possibly just looking for, if there's a moment where you can be a bit more melodic, then do that. But actually in this whole bass line, there's nothing really melodic going on. It's the exact same thing the whole way through. Yeah, literally to the end. Just following kind of triadic movement that was given to me in the opening. That's kind of like minors and bass line quality done. So I'm just going to go back to the chat here on YouTube for a second and make sure that there's nothing. Would love recommend going over what you. Oh yeah. Okay, somebody has said, can you double the 7th? So when you're using the 7th of a chord in the bass part, really what you're doing there is a third inversion chord. So that's a chord that is if let's say it was, and it'll likely be the 7th of the 5/7 chord, then what you'd have is a chord called 5D, which is the inversion you'd need. And that's a very specific case. Again, it's not covered in the curriculum for Leaving Cert, so I would be wary of using it at all. And because it's not covered in the curriculum, technically it can't be a requirement for any one solution. But if you are using it, how that 7th resolves is the more important part. So I would not, in my own experience, this is just off the top of my head now, I wouldn't have seen the 7ths being doubled a lot. So I don't think you can double the 7th in my own experience, but it's certainly where it goes from there. The 7th, if it's in the bass, it must resolve to the 3rd of the 1 chord. So if you know what that means, you know what that means. If you don't, you can happily and blissfully ignore it. There's also worked examples on YouTube for a few of the years. Yeah, there is. So there's worked examples on my own YouTube channel. I have a playlist called JC and LC Music or something like that, and all of the kind of harmony stuff is in there. I also have a music theory playlist and some of the solutions that I've done myself. I kind of walk them through. Thanks for organising this. No worries. They should just have an exam where you make. Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. So this person said that you should have an exam where you just have to make a beat in FL Studio or whatever DAW of choice. I agree with this person. If there is a rising scale or something similar across 2 bars and passing note is on the first beat of the second bar. First beat of second. Okay. Do you count it as a passing note or treat the 2 bars separately? Okay, that's a very technical question, and I'll read it once more just in case people want to follow along with that. If there's a rising scale or something similar across 2 bars and the passing note, in quotation marks, is on the first beat of the second bar, do you count it as a passing note or treat the 2 bars separately? This really depends on what the rest of the stuff, or the context of the actual melody. I'm presuming you're talking about the melody part. So if it's the melody part you're talking about, you'll have to see the context of within the bar, how many chords are you required to harmonize, and what has come before it. Is that part of a chord? It could well be that there's a passing note on the downbeat or on the strong beat of a bar, and it's the rest of the notes in that bar that are going to give you the context. What I tend to do is steer on the side of majority rules. So if you have one box and a majority of notes are leading you in one direction, then you can possibly say that's a passing note on the strong beat. Usually, and this is again, we're talking very generally, the passing notes will be on the off beats, but there have been examples of past papers that the passing note happens to be on the strong beat in some bars. So you just have to kind of be really sharp there and really look at the context of the melody, and make your best judgment as to what the right outcome is there. And majority rules is a good rule of thumb there, I think, generally. There's also, just on that note, there's a thing called an anticipation note. So sometimes you actually get in melodies, and it'll happen in the 2020 paper. Just give me 2 seconds, I'll get back to answer questions in a moment. Yeah, there's an example here of what we know as an anticipation note here. So in the first bar here we have, let you hear it. So that last one there, that note D, is considered an anticipation note. Now in this particular harmonization, the chord is actually doing the syncopation with the melody, so there wasn't as big a conundrum. But if, for example, this box happened to be over here, it wasn't in this particular case, but if it was here, you're kind of reading this note as being belonging to this next box and not necessarily this these 2 notes. So if you're presented with this and there was an empty box here, you have to consider this note as being part of just an early arrival on the note that's supposed to be in this box. So this box is actually this note. So that can kind of happen too. So if I'm trying to decide what this chord should be, I'm actually saying that C is the thing that I'm focusing my attention on here. But if you look at majority rules again, the amount of time rhythmically on these 2 notes trumps the amount of time on this note rhythmically. So majority rules is one that would keep you safe in that context. Okay, let me go back to questions now, and I will wrap up shortly. You're probably losing the will to live. How do you choose the baseline? So yeah, choosing the baseline, I kind of went through that already. So it's just really trying to copy and paste the 4-bar phrase across it and making adjustments to the new chords that you have that are obviously different to what the opening phrase was. And then if you have moments where there is a little bit of stepwise movement available to you, and it kind of makes something that sounds quite musical to your ear or rhythmically or whatever, then you might then ramp up the quality part. But I would just reiterate, I wouldn't go around doing triplets or semi-quaver movement or anything that was kind of unprecedented from what was given to you in the opening. Oh, cool. I kind of just answered that question without realizing. So if the note is tied in the melody, should the chord fit the tied note or the following untied note if the box is over the tied note? So I kind of just did that example there for Paul Gillespie, so hopefully that helped him, and you can let me know if it didn't. Would avoiding progressions that go by step be best? As in, if you should you always try to only move by falling thirds? Yeah, so that's a really good rule of thumb. So there's a question: would you avoid progressions that go by step? I actually cover that in my booklet. So if I can, oh yeah, sorry, let me just do this. It's going to disappear for a second, but I'll get it back now in 2 minutes. Where is that? Okay, here. So in this booklet that is again free to download below. So if you want to do that, feel free to do that. I go over chords moving by step. So how I've done it is the one chord, how it likes to move. So falling a third, rising a fourth, rising a fifth, leap away after a step. So I go through each chord of the whatever key we're in. I just kept in C major for a simple. So I go through the 1 chord, the 2 chord, the 4 chord because we don't do the 3 chord, 5 chord, the 6 chord. And what you'll start to see is this pattern emerging in chord progressions that work well. Chords rising and falling a fourth or fifth work well. Chords falling a third work well. If a chord moves by step, it generally wants to leap away after, and then the exception to that rule is this line here. An exception to this can be found in an interrupted cadence with chords 4 to 5 to 6. And then I have an example of that somewhere below apparently. Oh, here we go, yeah. So chord 4, going to chord 5, going to chord 6, where you have step, step. That's kind of the exception. But all other times when you step, you generally want to move away afterwards. So I hope that answers that. Okay, OBS. So I'm just going back. I'll leave that up for a second and you can read through that while I go for more questions. Oh yeah, cool. I see people answering for other people in there in the question, so it might be worth your while reading through the question box if you don't understand the treatment of the minor seventh. If you don't understand the treatment of the seventh in a minor key, which is what I presume Molly is asking about here, really what I would suggest is just digging into the I in that booklet I go through minor keys as well, so it might be worth your while just spending some time with that, and just you really need to get to grips with the harmonic minor key. So if you or harmonic minor scale. So if you just spend a bit of time working out in any given key, what is my 7th degree if I'm in a minor key, and again the clues are in the chord bank usually for that. And if you can work out what is the 7th note of this scale that I'm in. So like in D minor, our example earlier, the 7th note happens to be C. If I just count up D, E, F, G, A, B flat, C, that's my 7. I don't know if I'm in shot here at all. Then that's the note C that needs to be raised. So C sharp is the note I use. So you can avoid it a lot, but at some point, if if that's what you're just doing, if you're just avoiding the 7th, I think you'll be found out quite quickly insofar as every time you come across a 5 chord, you're just using the root in the 5th. It's possibly better than misusing it. So if you're really, really struggling, I'd say that might be a clever course of action. But I would say the base quality in your marks there, that might come down, depending on the context of the key. Hopefully we get a minor key and it's all roots and fifths, and it's kind of hidden that maybe you didn't know how to use that. Okay. Another question, if the harmony question is in harmonic minor, but there is an instance in the melody where the 7th is not raised, are you still able to use a chord that contains the raised 7th over that bar? The straight answer to that, very excellently worded question, I might say, is no, because what you're looking to do there is, if that is the case, I'll just read that question again from this person. If the harmony question is in harmonic minor, which is the way you're going to be thinking about it, but there is an instance in the melody where the 7th is not raised, are you still able to use a chord that contains the raised 7th over that bar? So that means if the raised 7th or what should be the raised 7th is not raised in the melody, in the right hand of the piano part, and you want to use a chord with a raised 7th, meaning you want to use chord 5, the answer there is no, you shouldn't use chord 5. The likelihood of what chord should be used is chord 4 in that instance. I would say 4 and 2 are the main chords you're going to use in that context of that question from that person. Great question though. Can you only use 5 as a chord if there's a raised 7th in the melody, or can you use it in other places? You can definitely use it in other places. So let's say the 5th and the 7th of a 5/7 chord was in play in a minor key. That's one place you could use the 5 chord. If only the root and the 5th of the 5 chord were present, you can definitely use the 5 chord, because that would technically fit the melody at that point. And then if you wanted to arpeggiate in the bass line the 5 chord, you would then possibly be including the raised 7th, which happens to be the 3rd of our 5 chord in a minor key. It might be worth just, I've said a lot of stuff there, let me just so just if our 5 chord is here, that's going to be A, that's going to be A, C sharp and E. So root would be A here on the 5 chord, then C sharp would be just above that, and then E. So I hope that makes maybe sense. Okay, there's a few more questions. So we're nearly coming up to 8:30 there, so I'll oh yeah, we're nearly at the questions here, and the questions. Are you expected to copy the given in the bass the whole way through? Yeah, as close as you can. There'll be parts where you'll just have to vary it because of rhythm, because they've given you 3 boxes in a bar where there was only 1 in each of the examples given to you. So you can kind of, you just have to do what you can do there. But as best you can, yeah, you want to copy the bass line that was given to you, and that's covering the tick box of awareness of style. When do you raise the 7th in the bass line? So whenever you raise the 7th in the bass line, if it's in a minor context, you raise it whenever you want to use the 7th degree of the scale. So what will be happening there, the reality of your situation there will be, you want to use the 3rd of the 5 chord. The 3rd of a 5 chord is the raised 7th note in the minor context. So it's if you're on chord 5 and you're writing your bass line, or you're trying to arpeggiate or do an arpeggio or broken chord of your chord at that point, it's the 5 chord where you want to look out for the raised 7th. Does an anacrusis affect where the strong beats are? No, an anacrusis won't affect where the strong pulses are in a particular meter or time signature. What affects that is the actual time signature itself. The anacrusis just means that there's an upbeat into most of those 4-bar phrases that we talked about earlier. And then it just has an implication for your bass note as to what rhythmic value you have in the very last bar. And I said it before, but I'll say it again. The anacrusis bar plus the last bar need to add up to whatever your time signature is. Would you please be able to upload this live to your... Yes, it will be up over... So this goes straight onto my YouTube channel after. Warts and all, so all that glitchy stuff at the start will be there too, unfortunately. Is it bad to copy bars exactly from the given bass? No, it's not bad at all, as long as you're adjusting for the new chords. So if you're just copying them and you're going along the whole way and you haven't changed to fit the new chords that you've put, you'll lose all of the marks in the bass. So the pattern can stay the same. So if it's root, root, 3rd, root, that root, 3rd, root can happen the whole way along. That was our example earlier. But you need to adjust as you change chords. Hello, Miraday. If you use 5-1 or 4-1 in a place that isn't a cadence on the score, no, that's not bad. So if by chance the only solution tomorrow was 1-5, 1-5, 1-5, 1-5, 1-5, 1-5, and 20 boxes later we have a 5-1, then that's okay, because chord 1 can go to chord 5 and vice versa all day long, and chord 1 can go to chord 4 and vice versa all day long. So if you're using it in an instance where it isn't a cadence, that's actually going to happen. I would say there's a large chance that you're going to do that anyway. So do you just use the raised 7th when using the bass then? In a minor context, the raised 7th may actually be happening in the melody, and at that point that's giving you a clue maybe to use chord 5. But again, there's no real requirement to use it in the bass unless maybe in the given phrase, the given bass pattern, the third of a chord was used, and in that context you may be wanting to keep in what was given to you and use root third fifth, for instance, and that would require you to use the raised seventh. How do I open the booklet? Okay, so when you download the booklet, you'll get an email into your whatever email you gave, and then that email, there'll be a button in that email where it just says view document or something like that, or view booklet, and it'll open it like a PDF in your browser, I think. How do you treat tied notes if they're under the box? You can actually scroll back. There's a part in the video where I actually covered that. But tied notes, they are likely anticipation notes. So there's a bit of syncopation there as well, maybe. But if I go back to my 2020 example, yeah, it's open on that straight away. So this is the instance that you're talking about there. And what I kind of said was, if this was what you had to do, so the box was, let's say, pretend it's there for a second, I would be considering this note as kind of being covered by this chord, and I would consider this box not needing to be concerned with what this note is, if that makes sense. And again, what I used there was a majority rules. So C, quaver, C, crotchet, that's a longer, that's 2 votes for chord 2 here, as opposed to chord 5 with just 1 quaver on the 1 note of the chord 5. Hope that makes sense. Sorry, flying back over to questions. They're coming in thick and fast. Oh, I did say I would do the Cadential 6/4, so let me just okay, so if you're using the raised 7th, my rule is where possible it wants to resolve to La straight away. So this person asked, if you use the raised 7th in the bass, does it need to be followed by Mi or La or Ti? So this kind of, we could get lost here in translation a bit, but let's if we can use note names, it might be a bit easier. So let's say I'm in D minor, and C sharp is my raised 7th. So I would want that to resolve in most contexts, and I can, like 90%, 99% maybe, most contexts, that raised 7th wants to resolve to your tonic, which in the case of D minor, C sharp will go to D as D minor. So in tonic solfa, I would see that as going from C, as in SI, for C sharp, C La. So La is the answer to that question. Does an upbeat affect cadential points? It can do, in the sense that if it's a quaver upbeat, for instance, let me see what happens in that other one quickly. So I'll come back over to music score. I think it was 2016 that had the A minor one. Sorry for the dizzy scrolling. Yeah, okay, so 2016 had a quaver upbeat. So here's the end of that phrase. If I just play that once more, you just give me a sense. So that's the end of that phrase in the melody. This E is belonging to the next phrase. So it affects the cadence insofar as if that was like something that was really different to what this chord was, you'd likely be given an extra box here. But this actually, it generally works out that the upbeat into the next phrase will be a part of whatever your cadence point was here. And this is obviously an imperfect cadence. So we've got 4 bars, 1, 2, 3, landing on our imperfect cadence of bar 4 here. And then the upbeat to the next phrase happens to be just part of that 5 chord anyway. So we don't need to worry about it too much. And again, same thing kind of happens here. Here's the next upbeat, but it's part of our 5 chord again. So I hope that answers that. Does an upbeat affect? Oh, that's the one I just answered. In 2020 paper, what chord would you use in bar 7 and 8? Because I had 2 to 1. Oh, yeah, okay, cool. So actually, Alana O'Connell, thank you for that question. That's given me, that's a segue that I can use to get into my Cadential 6/4 stuff. So I'll go back to that if you don't mind in a second. Andy Armitage, did you go through doubling the third at this at any point? I did actually. So I haven't been watching it all. Apologies. Okay, so no worries, Andy. So yes, I did. I covered doubling the third earlier on in the video. Look out for the table that's coloured orange and blue, or amber and blue. That's the point. I was covering that. Oh, actually, that was actually where I had a big mistake. I had the wrong thing up on the screen for you. So if you can see that blunder happening, then that's where to go. Do you ever use passing notes in bass? Yeah, you can do. You absolutely can do. I wouldn't overuse them, particularly if they're going really far away from what was given to you. So if you this is where maybe bass quality, if there's one sparing or two moments where you find, okay, I can do a passing note here, and it actually adds to the musicality of the phrase of the bass note, that actually might be the place to use it. But I wouldn't be using it because, oh, I'm going to get brownie points if I use it. So all of these things should be kind of reasoned and argued with a relative amount of conviction if you're going to do something. I would do everything with purpose. Thanks, you're welcome. Do they dock marks if you somehow only use 3 chords throughout the entire question? If those 3 chords are part of a good chord progression, and if those 3 chords fit the melody, and if those 3 chords are cadences at the right moments, then absolutely not. There is the whole adage of every melody can be harmonized with the primary chords 1, 4, and 5, so that may well be the case. Oh, thanks, Holly. You're a lifesaver. Thanks. Thank you so much. If there is octave leaps in the bass, are you expected to have an octave leap in every bass? Not everyone, but in wherever that octave leap happens in the bass part, you do want to be using an octave leap. An octave leap is a very distinct interval move in both bass and melody. So if an octave leap happens in the given bass pattern and you don't have any octave leaps, then you really haven't kept within the style, because that would be considered a very distinct part of that bass. What chords can 2B go to? 2B can go to all of the chords that 2 can go to, if you want to think of it that way. That's also covered. Where chord 2 wants to go to in both the minor and major contexts is in that booklet. You just have to scroll down a bit. I don't know exactly what page it's on. Actually, I can just leave it up in the background here for now if you want to read it. Harmony booklet. And then what do I need to do? Harmony booklet. Okay, chords at work. So that's where chord 2 likes to go to. And that's the major context. And then I have the same thing going for the minor context. Okay, so going back to a comment here, in 2020 paper, what chord would you use in bar 7 and 8? Because I had 2 to 1. So this is giving me an opportunity to talk about the Cadential 6/4, and I will leave it here, guys. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm very overwhelmed with how many people actually came on. And if you are rewatching this and you were on earlier, I just want to say best of luck tomorrow. And if you need to go now, that's fine. So the Cadential 6/4 may cause confusion for people, so I don't want that to be the case. So if you don't know what that is and you're really confused about that, I don't know how helpful this next little passage will be. But in the 2020 paper, there was a moment where actually the Cadential 6/4 was the right choice, and it was kind of the only choice at one moment, if I'm remembering correctly. So I'll open up the MuseScore scene once more on my OBS, and I'll navigate to that part, and then I'll probably leave it there because we've just gone past the half-8 mark. I'll stay around, I'll hang around at the end, and if I can answer any of the questions, I will do that too. Okay, 2020. Sorry for dizzy scrolling. Sorry, 1 second now. Sorry guys, disappeared for a second there. Okay, so 2020 paper. So this is the bar we're talking about, bar 7 to 8. Okay, we have the only thing that you could have done here was chord 2 in bar 7, and the only thing you could have done here was chord 1, because it's arpeggiating the chord of 1. We're in E flat major, just for a bit of context, and the melody in bar 8 here is E flat, B flat and G. So that's the most obvious arpeggiation of chord 1 that you could possibly have, which meant that we needed chord 1 here. So you're not allowed to go chord 2 to 1, but this again was very obviously chord 2, and there was no other real option for you, so you were kind of stuck. It was a bit of a sticking point. So the answer that, and again, because I'm such a nerd, we've had many discussions about this with colleagues, but the answer that a lot of people and a lot of colleagues of mine came to was we go chord 2 in this box, 2B in this box, and then we do a 1C, which is the second version of chord 1, and resolve that to chord 5. And in this context, we're using a cadential 6/4 because it's at a cadence point. The cadence happens to not be a perfect cadence, but indeed it is an imperfect cadence, and the cadential 6/4 part of that equation, so the 6/4 is where you use chord 1C, or the second version of chord 1, and in this context it was E flat over B flat, so an E flat in the right hand and a B flat in the bass. In Roman numeral land you express that as chord 1 with a C. And I'll give you a bit of context. I'll let this phrase play for you. And that was really the best answer in that context. The other thing I'll say about the cadential 6/4 is it can happen like this at an imperfect cadence point, but also it needs to have the cadential part, the 6/4 part, as in the second version, needs to happen on a strong beat, and then the 5 needs to happen on the weak beat. So you can't have this where the cadential 6/4 part, the 1C part, is happening on the weaker part of the bar. So if I have, let's say I had 5 here and then 1C on the second half, you're not allowed to use it in that context. And that comes back to the marking scheme. Where I'm getting that from is this page here. Cadential 6/4 must be on the stronger of the 2 beats and at a cadence point. Stronger of the 2 beats and at a cadence point. So that kind of covers the cadential 6/4. I'll go back quickly to questions. Do you only use sharps and flats in the bass for minor? You'll only need to use accidentals, as in adding in them for the minor key. Yeah, you won't need accidentals in the major key for question 5. Question 5, 2019 for bars 9 to 12. Okay, is contrary motion good in the bass? Yeah, contrary motion generally works well, but I wouldn't be doing contrary motion unless it was in keeping with what was given to you before. Again, that comes back to is it precedented and is it unprecedented, and is it actually maybe a moment where you can be show a bit more flair. If there's an option at the very end of the bass line to have an upward or downward arpeggio, does one sound better than the other? Honestly, not necessarily. I think context of whatever piece you are in is what's going to guide that. If you can get a sense of what the piece sounds like, obviously the more musical answer is the right one, and both might work depending on what the context is. Does the cadential 6/4 not go 1C 5-1? It does at the very end of a piece, but you can have it that so that 1C 5-1 is where the cadential 6/4 is being used as a perfect cadence at the end of a piece, but you can have it where it happens halfway through a piece and at a cadence point, and where you have 1C going to 5, but that's setting up what we know as an imperfect cadence. So it can happen at both parts. And what you will likely have done a lot of exercises and examples on is the one you've just mentioned there, Ollie, which is 1C 5 to 1 at the end of a piece, but it can happen at an imperfect cadence point as well. And then I'll just have a question in there specifically about question 5 2019 paper, bars 9 to 12, tied notes, same value. I hope I've done a good solution there. Give me 2 seconds. So let me do OBS, view score. Okay, 2019. Bars, what was it? Bars 9 to 12. Yeah, so this is what I did. I have chord 4 going to chord 2B, and in this context, actually, you can consider this F as belonging to this box or the next box. But if I had to make a judgment call on it, I'm actually considering it as being this F kind of belonging to this set of notes here. So kind of the same situation that I talked through in the 2020 example, but I see this anticipation note as being part of this chord, if that makes sense. So this set of notes is what I'm looking at for harmonizing that box. Okay. Perfect. Yeah, no problem, Ollie. Thanks for the question. Could you have... Could you have used a regular 1 chord? Leon, I'm not sure exactly where you're talking. Oh, maybe you're talking about the 2020 example. In that case, you couldn't have used a regular 1 chord because 2 to 1 is considered a per choice and a generally not accepted chord on the marking scheme. Shannon has a question. How do I know when and where to add flats or sharps in a minor bass? So what I would suggest to you, Shannon, is if you can get to grips with how you use the raised 7th version, as in the harmonic minor, then don't worry about what we know as the melodic minor. So only worry about that raised 7th because I find that if people are confused about where to raise them, where to flatten them, or where to naturalize them again, that means that you actually just need to focus on just raising the 7th. So I'd be suggesting that you just stick to the harmonic minor scale, and if you can get to grips to that by tomorrow, which I do think is possible, then you can absolutely get through the whole thing without having to use the rising scale versus the descending scale. What do you mean by resolving the 7th, and is it the same for 3rd? So the 7th depends on whether you mean it's in the right hand or the left hand. So the 7th generally wants to behave in a melody context, the right hand, as falling to the 3rd of the scale that you're in. So just to put an example, so if I'm using the chord 5-7 in C major, I'm talking about the chord G major. So it's going to have the notes G, B, D, and F in it. The F is the 7th note there of that chord, and that F wants to fall by step. It's Fa in tonic sol, Fa to Mi, and it wants to fall by step to the Mi, which happens to be the 3rd note intervallically of the 1 chord. So if F falls to E, and you think of the 1 chord in C major, so we've got G7 going to C major, that F going to E is the 7 falling by step to the 3rd. And that's generally how the 7 likes to behave, both actually in the bass and the melody. Another great question there. If the cadential 6/4 is used at an imperfect cadence point, must the 5 be followed by 1 in the next bar? Generally speaking, yes, it would be. It may be that it goes to 6 then after, but like again, if I'm playing the law of averages, it will likely go to 1 after that. Yeah, that's exactly. So for the harmonic minor, do you just raise the 7th whenever you use it? And I would say general rule of thumb is yes, but make sure that you're using it in the context of the 5 chord in that harmonic minor key. So if you're in D minor, chord 5 is A, so you should be using the Re 7th in the context of that, the use of that chord, and not just kind of using willy-nilly the 7th degree wherever you feel like it. Make sure it's part of the 5 chord, and you should be safe if you go by that rule book. So if you're forced to use two chord followed by a 1 chord, you should use 2 to 1C. Yeah, that's kind of what happened in the 2020 paper. It does allow, there's a bit of wiggle room, I would say, in the wording. If I can just go back to that really quickly, there's a bit of wiggle room. If you look here, it says cadential 6th form must, 2 to 1 both in the minor key and major key. 2 to 1 is generally not accepted. So I think the generally not accepted there allows for a bit of wiggle room. That's my own hunch and interpretation there of the language. If it said 2 to 1 is not accepted except as approach to 1C, then we have a different thing. But the use of the word generally there, I think, is a wiggle room thing, maybe on the marking scheme. I could be completely wrong about that, so don't quote me. But yeah, to answer that question over on YouTube, if you've got 2 to 1, should you use the 1C? If it's available to you and if it makes the whole cadential 6/4 thing happen, then yes. What exactly is raising the 7th? Okay, quick one on. Let me see. I'm just setting up a music score here, and I'll just show that quickly. If that's okay with everyone, this is going to be the last thing I do, because I'm feeling my voice starting to go now. Actually, keep the questions coming, and I'll be sure to log on back tomorrow morning, and I'll text response people, or type in text response to people, and I'll tag you in it so you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so I'm in music score here. Key signature here is C major, but let's pretend that that's A minor. Okay, so key signature here is C. Let's, for a second, if we pretend that was C major, like this. Okay, the relative minor of that is going to be A minor, because the 6th degree, if I count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it's going to be A. So if I make that my tonic now, I've got the following. I'll just do quick lyrics. Okay, and 7, 8, but 1 again, really, because it's the same note. Okay, so we've got this. Raising the 7th to get it to sound harmonic minor means going to the 7th degree of the minor scale, in this case A. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And if I raise that by a semitone, I get G sharp. Which is this. And if we're calling it in numbers, we tend to call that a sharpened 7th. We tend to call that a flat 3 and a flat 6. So don't worry about these numbers underneath, but it's just show you what degree scale we're on, and it sounds like this. So the whole time I've been talking about the Re 7th in a minor context, this is the scale that you have to use. It's a scale that, if you were in, again, just to go through the steps, C major becomes the 6th degree of that is A. So I start my new scale from A. I use all of the same notes as C major, and then if I count up 7, I go to my 7th and I raise it by adding an accidental sharp. And it's this accidental sharp that needs to be there all of the time if you're using it in the bass clef. So it's only in the bass where you'll have to use the accidental along with that note or that degree of the scale. That's what we've been talking about when we say raise the 7th. I hope that's clear. So I'm going to bring the stream to an end. Thank you so much for joining me. I was really honestly overwhelmed with how many people logged on. I do hope it was helpful, and the best of luck to everybody in tomorrow's exam. I am eagerly awaiting, like you all are, what's on each of the questions, whether it's major, minor, what's on question 1 through 4 of the listening paper, and so on. So best of luck, everybody, and I'll hang on for another 5 minutes and we'll do text response to anybody who comes on. Thank you. Bye.